trying to develop a Weltanschauung and developing a toe, because there are a lot of methodological questions about what a toe is and how do you develop one.
For those people who are wondering, like, what the heck did you just say? A word that I reference frequently on this podcast is Weltanschauung, which is a German word. It literally translates to world vantage point, something like that. Which
world
sounds
vantage
like
point,
right?
right?
The way that I use it is more
so
of
a vantage
an
point can be
world view, rather
free
than
of thought.
Because almost all of us
thought
have world
free,
it seems like to live you have
pure
to have
observation
a world, you have
state
to have a model, but not all of us have a consistent model
a particular
that
view
is based in
of the world.
ontology, and that's what I mean by Weltanschauung. And I make an analogy.
So it doesn't have to
that
be within
theories
thought
of
at all,
everything,
does it?
Because most physicists think of theories of everything as a grand unified theory that takes into account gravity. And I take it a bit further to incorporate some philosophy and even psychology. So that's just an asterisk. See, some materialists would say that non-dualism is so far out there that it either can't be true or it's unfalsifiable or whatever they may say.
So what's a singularity? A physicist, hey physicists, what's a singularity? Does a singularity exist? Well, that's by definition non-dual.
I view non-dualism as not outrageous enough because it takes into account consciousness, which is so direct to our experience. It takes that as fundamental, and I'm not even sure if consciousness is fundamental.
Bam!
Maybe something epic,
Well done.
conscious, something that's even out.
Well done. Well done. Well done. There is something beyond consciousness, because consciousness is, yeah, exactly like I said, it's the content of awareness, and awareness doesn't need content because it's absolute, self-sufficient, self-fulfilling. That's the biggest thing, is self-fulfilling. When I was sitting there as thought-free awareness a while ago, there was no past, no future, no reason for what I was doing at all. There was no causal reason for me doing that. And because of that, it was completely self-fulfilling. But you won't understand what I'm talking about, unfortunately, until you reach that state. And if you don't engage in spiritual practice, meditation, getting to that thought-free state where you're not focused on thoughts or sensations, but both are kind of in the periphery, then you won't understand what I'm saying, and your life will continue on, and you'll keep having these questions, and you'll keep seeking, and you'll keep having suffering, and there you go.
Outside consciousness that's not material.
No, there can't be, because consciousness is infinite. So this is a very common trap that materialists fall into, and people who start to study consciousness is that they start to imagine things beyond consciousness, but while they're doing that, they're not conscious of the fact that they're imagining, and that itself is conscious.
That doesn't matter to me, because in the same way you had a great video, which I don't believe I've watched in quite some time, on girls and Completeness Theorem. In the same way that a formal system can't see outside, now this is false, what I'm saying is diluting it, but in the same way that a formal system, in some sense, can't see outside its own formal system, like first order logic can't see second order logic, in that same manner, it doesn't matter that consciousness can't see outside consciousness, therefore nothing outside consciousness exists. Also, it doesn't matter that consciousness is infinite, because to say that there's nothing outside consciousness, because consciousness is infinite. What is the R2 plane but two copies of infinity? You have R1, that's infinite, doesn't mean anything.
So a plane, if I'm not mistaken, is 2, right? Another measurement. So what happens is that science, let's say reality is a one whole. It's a whole. There's just one. There's a singularity. It's just one. But what thought does is, and science especially, is that it measures reality, and he cuts it up. Those measurements cut it up into like a puzzle. You make a puzzle out of this singular whole wave function where you don't label something. And then it tries to put the pieces back together into unification. But the lines of the pieces are there. You can't, it's not the same. There's probably pieces missing, but it's not the same picture. You can't do that. What you have to do is not cut it up in the first place.
No. Here's the mistake. The mistake is that
Thought is the
in
mistake.
terms of Gödel's Completeness Theorem, that actually buttresses my point, because Gödel is talking about finite formal systems. Consciousness is not a finite formal system, and therefore, of course, what Gödel's Completeness Theorem basically says is that if you have any kind of sufficiently complex finite formal system that is capable of self-reflection, pointing back at itself, it will always lead to a contradiction, and it will always be incomplete if you don't take certain precautions to modify the system to prevent self-reflection from happening. Because truth is always a larger concept than provability, which is part of the reason why provability and falsifiability is not a good way of going about developing your ultimate understanding of reality, because what you're really after is truth, not proof. And there are many things that are true that you cannot prove and will never be able to prove, and that is in fact what Gödel proved, which is so brilliant about his proof, is that he was able to use proof and turn it in on itself to basically prove that proof is not the end of reality. There's always more to reality than anything you can prove.
I'd more like take the Penrose point of view and say that what Gödel showed is that our mind is not a formal system, rather than that proof lies outside of provability. The space of all that is true lies outside a formal system provable notion of truth. That's what I would say.
Yeah, okay, yeah, we agree. So, but back to the more important point. So basically, you're assuming, the problem is that when I tell you infinite consciousness, you have a picture in your mind of what infinite consciousness is, and that picture, you must realize, is finite. So all your ideas of infinite consciousness are not infinite consciousness, they're finite consciousness. But I'm talking about actual infinite consciousness. Now, what that is, you actually don't have access to it at this point. When you get access to it, right? So when you become infinitely conscious, you realize that literally nothing can exist outside of consciousness, because imagine that you can see the entire universe, everything. Imagine everything that could ever possibly exist. Imagine you're conscious of it all at the same time. Now ask yourself, could there be anything beyond that I'm missing? And if you say, yes, there could, that means you weren't conscious of that thing, and that you weren't really infinitely conscious. And when you realize that, then you realize, aha, consciousness is absolutely all that there is, and there's nothing ever outside.
So with all of this, there's always, the model is that there's always an observer observing the thing. So you are always, it's a mess.
Out of consciousness.
It's a mess.
And then you realize that
need to get to the
there
property
cannot be
state.
any kind of simulation, there cannot be any kind of self-deception, there cannot be any kind of wrongness about the fact that consciousness is infinite and absolute. Because it in fact is, and in fact you are absolutely conscious.
My objection was not to consciousness imagining something outside itself and that still existing within consciousness. It was more about the use of the word infinity. Look, I'm a stickler. I'm a persnickety stickler for words. And so usually when people mean infinity,
Curt,
when someone says...
This is why my model, it should align with what you're talking about here. And
See, I see this as a linguistic trick. Look, it's infinite, therefore there's nothing outside it. That's not what infinite means, if you're using the word infinite. And I gave the example of the R2 plane, and the reason why...
So here's the twist. Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying, but yeah, go ahead.
For the audience, there's an R2 plane, you understand what an R3 plane is. that's the real line is infinite, but that doesn't mean there doesn't exist something outside that real line, because you can have the R2 plane, and it's a forgetful functor, technically speaking, to go from the R2 plane to the R plane. You've forgotten some information. So the R1 is embedded in the R2 plane. And so you can have something that's infinite, but still not all-encompassing. So maybe the word the word that people would like to use instead of infinite is all-encompassing. So that's different.
Yes. Completion. There's no sense of completion with infinity. The game is not won. The game continues on and on and on. See, this is why, as radical as Leo thinks he is, it's the end of the world. We're talking about the end of the world. All experience, all thought, gone. Leaving only existence, only life, only potential, only the absolute.
Different than the word infinite.
So, yeah, there's
Zero.
definitely a problem here with language. And the problem here is that people...
So the absolute means that it's not relative. So infinity is relative, right? Infinity is still a measurement and a relative existence. Whereas zero is the source of that infinity. So it's a more comprehensive, complete version, and that's what Curt is alluding to. But Leo doesn't quite see that.
don't have a proper understanding of what infinite is, because virtually nobody none of your professors, none of
You
your
don't
teachers,
have
none
a
of the books you
proper
read,
understanding
none of the
what
people who wrote them
the
were
absolute
actually
is.
infinitely conscious. Therefore, they have no idea what they're talking about. Everything they're talking about is actually finite. So, let's for those of you who are math nerds and logic nerds,
It's complete. I'm sorry, man, but it's wrong. It's not. You can't use infinity for this. You're a little. There's something about it that's a little askew, and I think it's because you don't talk about the thought-free state. You don't talk about transcending thought. You don't talk about the end of the world and no more experience. So therefore, I see where you are, and it's close. There's the understanding, but there isn't the actualization of such. So you have to start meditating, man. You can't just do this with drugs, like you need to put in the work. You need the practice of always constant, unending practice of shifting attention away from thoughts and sensations and onto pure being. Because that's the goal, that's the purpose of all of this. There's a singular purpose to all of this. Do you understand? That this is a game. And the game, the purpose of the game, it's like a labyrinth. You try to get out. Yeah.
hopefully you've heard of Georg Kant.
This is the fundamental tenets of the major religions all say this. What's heaven? What's nirvana? What's moksha? What's the Tao? Well, it's transcendent, right? Nirvana is exactly the ending of samsara. So the fundamental tenets of the major religions is telling us what it is. It's a game, and the goal is to escape the game, which Christ did, which Ramana Maharshi did, which Buddha did. See?
Cantor, and Georg Cantor was the developer of set theory, what has become modern set theory, basically. And he was one of the first in the last century, in the late 1800s, he basically came up with the idea of multiple orders of infinity. So you have the natural numbers, or just like the integers. That's the integers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's one order of infinity.
If there's a measure, it's again, you're comparing an illusion to an illusion. You're not the frame of reference is always zero. It doesn't make any sense to compare an illusion to an illusion, measure an illusion against an illusion. So if you insist on measuring something, it's always going to produce two. That aren't exactly the same. So that's why it appears as though one infinity is bigger than another if you compare it to each other. But if you compare them both to the absolute, to zero, then they're both the same, no? It's completely ridiculous to say that one infinity is greater than another infinity. Intuitively, everyone knows this. It's ridiculous. And it drove them nuts, didn't it? Yeah, drove these guys nuts.
Then you can take
Thinking
every
about
integer, you can find an infinite number of
infinity is
decimal
too long.
point numbers in between the numbers 0 and 1. And so
Nonsense.
Cantor basically proved that infinity is actually larger than the infinity of all the integer numbers. And so he made some ingenious proofs that basically showed that you can have higher and higher orders of infinity.
It's all samsara.
And that's all right. And what you're talking about with your R1, R2 planes and all that, that's just infinity order 1, infinity order 2, 3, 4, 5, and that's all within the mathematical, symbolic, conceptual domain. You have to understand that's a
No completion in
infinity.
any of this.
Then, Gerhard Cantor, if you studied his work, ultimately, what's the natural conclusion? If you say, well, there's one size of infinity, then there's a second size of infinity, there's a third size, fourth size, even a bigger size, and a bigger one than that, what is the natural conclusion? You say, well, surely there must be an absolute infinity, an infinity of all the possible infinities. So it's an endless list of all infinities which keeps growing forever. And Georg Cantor called that absolute infinity, and he gave it the symbol omega. And by the way, he was a deeply religious man.
Why don't you just call it a day and call it infinity? It doesn't make any fucking sense to me. It's just infinite redundancy over and over and over. And this is the proof of what I said earlier, that systems of thought are only developed, the only purpose of systems of thought is to generate more thought, to generate more thought. That's it. And it drove these guys nuts. Well, a couple of them anyway. So this is proof of my theory that there's no reason, there's no conclusion to the thought process until you realize that it in itself is false and you turn away from it. The conclusion of the search, of the quest, of thought is when you conclude it. And you conclude it by not giving it any more attention.
And he, if you read his biography and stories about his life, he called Omega, he called it God.
Yeah, it's supposed to be zero though.
And a lot of people at the
else.
time, his colleagues, mathematicians, scientists, logicians, and so forth, they thought he was crazy. They did not accept the idea that there were even multiple orders of infinity. He thought he was doing pseudoscience. Until eventually, finally he won over after his death. I mean, he died in ill repute. He did not die happy that everyone accepted his set theories and all this. Most of his colleagues didn't accept it. He died, and then it took some decades and centuries, and then people came around to it and opened their minds. But look, even what Georg Cantor called omega absolute infinity, that was still all within the domain of concepts and numbers. So that is not what I mean by absolute infinity. That's peanuts compared to what I mean. What I mean is the following when I say infinity. So imagine all of mathematics.
Yeah, he
Imagine
goes
all
on
of
and
current
on and on
mathematics and all the
himself.
mathematics that will ever be done
Like,
ever in a trillion years of human existence.
It doesn't
So imagine
matter.
that our universe goes to its heat death, right? Like in, I don't know, 80.
You can experience it in the same way that I don't know what my parents were like when they were around my age. All I have are photographs. I don't know what their values were. I don't know how they think. I don't know what their body language was like, what their intonation was like. I know what their stories are now about then, but that's decidedly not the same.
Bust through all of the resistance you had towards realizing that you were God.
Would you say that it was necessary, or would you say that it helped? Like, what is the difference? Well, obviously there's a difference between those two, but why are you saying it's necessary? So let me give you an example. Is it necessary that...
Well, everything is necessary because everything is absolute tautology. This will take us into the free will question that I know you want to answer.
Well, we can get there.
Are we done with love yet, or is there more to love?
No, love. Yeah, so he talks quite a bit about love, and again, I question the use of that word because there's such a strong emotional connotation to it. So to me, love is pure observation. There's no judgment there. It's pure acceptance, absolute, pure, non-judgmental acceptance. That is love. It has nothing to do with emotions. It has nothing to do with warm fuzzies or some sort of a high. It's just pure observation, pure acceptance. That's what it is.
See, I'm not a fan of explanations that use the same word in a polysemic manner, because it's like, I think that different words should be given. Instead of saying level 1 love and then level 2 love, I think that you should give a different word to it. So say level 2 love is called love because we traditionally understand it to mean to have a certain connotation and denotation. And
There's romantic love, there's agape love, right? Or the love of a good cigar or something, right? So what I'm talking about is agape love, and that's the true love, which is just pure observation, complete acceptance of everything that happens with no judgment at all. So it's kind of like the opposite of the conventional Christian view where we die and then there's this big judgment thing that goes on. There is some sort of a karmic equation or debt that seems to be going on, but this is not an emotional thing. There's no individual behind it with an ego saying that you did this wrong. It's like gravity that just is there, and you work with it or you work against it.
Level 1 love, a different word, rather than calling these underived elemental blocks level 1 love. You call it something else. And the reason is that when you're explaining, you or anyone else, whenever they use, like I mentioned, the same word in an equivocal manner,
It gets confused, yeah.
yeah, and then you can take someone through these logical, sequential reasoning steps, and at each point someone can agree because the reader, the listener, or the watcher has a certain meaning in their head, but it's different than what you have. And then at some point you arrive at a different place. So I guess in some sense it's at the essence of this channel. I'm going to give a brief math analogy, then I'll give a Peterson analogy, which more people would get, but for you, you would probably get the math analogy. If I was in group theory, there's something called there's the group operation. So it's denoted with a circle, but you call it circ, but you can also call it plus. And if I was to use the generic group operation plus to mean the plus of the integers, which is commutative, but the generic group operation is not, then I can prove fantastic theorems. I can prove Goldbach's conjecture like this. And that's because I'm using the word plus equivocally, not specifically, indistinctly. So that's why I think one should outline relationships separately. Okay, now for those who aren't mathematically oriented,
I haven't got a
I'll
clue
give you a
what you're
different
talking
analogy.
about.
People accuse Peterson of Jesus smuggling, and part of the reason is that he'll bring up the word he'll bring up the word logos, which has a religious connotation, but it also has a secular one. And he'll give, or at least in some people's minds, he'll give the impression of speaking about the unsacred phenomenon, which is logos. And then all of a sudden you arrive in Jerusalem, and you're like, how the heck did I get here? And it's because one is using the same word in different manners, and you can agree at each point, and then arrive at a completely far off place. And I'm a proponent of being as precise as one can possibly be, especially when talking about fundamental reality, not to be unduly persnickety or to deride
No, you're right.
or to pick apart.
It's
but
important
somewhat
that
precisely the opposite, because
we know
think
what
that
we're talking
one
about.
should build one, or like I don't know how one can build a top shape.
He's absolutely right. When we get to these fundamental levels of reality, the subtle nuances are everything. The subtlety of it is profound. Subtle yet profound. The most profound things are the most subtle things.
Foundation, and this scrutiny breeds solidity.
That's 2 points about that. So, of course, we're entangled in language, and this presents enormous epistemic challenges for us, and even metaphysical ones, because the metaphysics is tied with the epistemology. So the problem is that all language is relative, and even your notion of what Jesus is not the same notion as my notion of what Jesus is. Literally every human mind on the planet has a different idea of what every word means. So even if we take...
So what would happen if we just sat here together, free of thought? Not much to disagree with there, is there?
Like the word chicken, your idea of chicken is not the same as my idea of chicken. If we sit down, we make a list of all our ideas about what a chicken is, our like ultimate definitions of chickens, there's going to be differences, and we can disagree about those.
Not only in the list, but in the perception. Like if you were to take psychedelics to somehow transport bodies, you may realize, man, I thought I knew what a chicken was, but I had no idea that you thought a chicken was this.
Yeah, exactly. So this is just, language is extremely tricky in this way. It's very relativistic in this way. And you can even change your own ideas of what a chicken is. Like, and in fact, you do that as you're doing science and as you're doing this philosophical work, is that part of the problem here is that when you start off, you adopt all these labels. Where do they come from? You didn't invent them. You got them from indoctrination from your schooling. You never questioned what a chicken is. They just told you it was a chicken, and you just accepted it. Likewise, they never told you really what an atom or an electron is,
Like
or
1 + 1 =
energy
2.
is. You
Like
just,
we just
accepted
accept
these
that.
just intuitively, had some intuitive vague sense, and then as you do the
360
work,
pages to
it
prove
gets
that 1 +
refined,
1
and then
=
you
2.
change your idea, like, oh, I thought energy was this, and now it's this, and then like, oh no, I was wrong about that too, and now it's this, and you
Sounds
keep expanding
fishy.
and refining your idea of energy, and the problem is that it's endless. You can do this forever, basically, and you're playing these games, and yeah, people use different definitions for different things, and so you have to take all that into account as you're listening to me, and also as you're thinking about your own definitions. And you have to also realize that maybe my definition of what love is isn't right. And by me, I don't mean me, I mean you. So like, maybe Leo is wrong about his ideas of love, but maybe the way you defined love, maybe there's a lot of fuzziness there, and maybe it's not being defined very well.
Yeah, maybe.
Or
Hey,
maybe there's
Leo?
a misunderstanding there. I actually have a really good analogy that I invented. I'm writing a book.
Is it about the Lego blocks?
No, it's a different one.
Okay. We'll talk about the Lego blocks. Let's hear the...
Yeah, okay. So this relates to the love question. All right, so imagine the following thought experiment. We take a small child, a baby. We build a special facility in which we're going to raise this child. The child will only live on this campus. Let's say it's a university campus. The child can only live there as a baby, and we will teach that child everything that, it's like a lab experiment. We're going to teach him only the words we want him to know and only the concept we want him to know, or her.
And it comes up with MMT.
We have a little backyard area there where we have ducks. And we take the child out there every day and we show him duck, 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 these ducks. And when we do that, we point to the duck and we say energy, energy, energy. And every time he sees a duck, he associates that with energy. And then we have classrooms that we put him in and we talk about how energy works. We give him some equations for energy and we explain energy, but all the time we tell him that duck is energy. And only duck is energy. That's what we teach him. Then what we do, let's say he's 20 years old, finally we let him out of this compound into the real world. He goes to a real university, and he goes to a physics classroom. And he's sitting there in the, Physics 101 class, and the professor is talking about how everything is energy. The table is energy, the stars are energy, the light bulbs in the room are energy, food is energy, and the kid is sitting there and he's completely dumbfounded and he's furious at this professor. Like, what kind of nonsense are you talking about? How can the table be energy? How can the stars be energy? How can light be energy? Only ducks are energy. Now, how do you train that person to have the proper concept of energy after 20 years of that brainwashing? So my claim is that this is exactly what has happened with love. We've been trained on what love is with pleasurable experiences that we've been getting, and how adults around us have told us what is appropriate to love and what is not appropriate to love. Like, it's okay to love bacon, but it's wrong to love having sex with goats. We've been trained, this is part of our culture, this is baked into us. And now, when someone like me comes along and says, everything is love, when I say the coffee table is love, you look at that and you look at me and you say, Leo is fucking crazy.
Now here
it doesn't.
Is where
it kind of makes.
I would say that we need a bit more sophistication with the language.
Yes.
So there's like two points we can take.
It makes it meaningless.
One can say
love means
it
means nothing when you
of the language. Like
use
language
it
is
like
actually
that.
holding us back, and I'm inclined to agree. And the other
Too
point is that our
abstract,
language
man.
is not
Just don't use love at all.
Or delineated or demarcated.
It's too loaded.
Enough.
It
And
has no
there's
business
arguments
being
to be
within
made there.
spirituality
And
at all.
one would be, like, let's talk about our friend Wittgenstein. He would say that language is simply use. So when you say book, the reason I understand it to be book is because we've used it in our culture to mean so-and-so. And when this person has been told energy, it works for them in the previous, I believe it was a university in that example, like a low-end university. And then at the second end, the higher-end university, whatever hierarchies we want to give it, the higher-end university, the more true university, the scientific university, energy was associated with atoms and so on. Well, the point was that different words should have been used, and that you can see the conflict because they're now being used differently.
No
So
love.
I would just say, rather than saying you need to untrain people or disabuse them of their notions of love, I would say perhaps you just need to come up with a different word. Like call it bagaboo
Acceptance.
instead of love.
No. That's precisely what my example is meant
Kurt's
to
right.
Disagree with and demonstrate
See?
why that's a bad idea.
Leo's a bit too abstract.
Is because
That there's something
there's
about
nothing
the
to
traditional
hold on
word
to.
love that you're trying to retain.
There
Because
isn't
if it was
even-
completely independent, you
At the
wouldn't
end of
have
it,
any
see, at the end of it all, I don't think he even prescribes a practice. So at the end of all of his teaching, let's say, there's nothing to grab onto. It's still just all abstract thought. If there's no practice at the end of it,
Qualm's calling it bagaboo.
it's hard for me to explain why it's important. I mean, I get the same argument. People tell me the same thing about God. They say, Leo, why do you call it God? It's so stupid. Why don't you just call it like nothingness? To make it more scientific and acceptable to atheists. You know, atheists will accept that reality is made of nothing. Atheists will accept that, but they won't accept God.
Yeah, what's your answer to that?
There's actually a deep problem. The resistance to the use of the word God or love is itself the problem that needs to be tackled and addressed head on. Because see, there's a reason why you're objecting to the use of the word love or God.
Because it's too
because you're
abstract,
resisting
Leo.
it.
It doesn't make
You
any
actually
sense.
don't want to realize that everything is God or everything is love.
So
you would want it to be called something.
It's too much connotation, emotional connotation with the word love. Let's get on with it.
That would make it easy because $10 billion, I don't know, $10 billion or something to build. All of that was done to try to prove the existence of some hypothetical Higgs boson particle that may or may not have existed. That's $10 billion, 10 years of building this thing, hundreds of scientists involved, hundreds of engineers, hundreds of laborers. That was very risky, and there was no guarantee that it was going to produce any kind of truthful result. It could have just been a waste of money.
All right, so this gets to some really fundamental stuff. Okay, so let us say that the endeavor of science is to reunify the yin and the yang, the body-mind duality, all dualities, let's say, or the wave-particle duality. Let's say that science is trying to reunify all that stuff. So the yin and the yang are illusory. All of it is illusion. It's not reality. And the attempt, so again, it's like the puzzle. Science creates the illusion by introducing a measurement. And then it tries to reunify what it just separated by using the same process that created the separation. So here's the analogy, is that imagine the two most powerful magnets in existence. And what science is trying to do is it's trying to force the two positive ends together, or it's pushing two like ends together, trying to get them to stick. But it can't, it won't, it never will. And when you get to a certain point with all this pressure, that it flips. You've done that, everyone's done that. You push the magnets together and you feel it pushing. And rather than thinking, oh, well, there's something fundamental here, and, you know, you just keep pushing, and then eventually, if they're the two most powerful magnets in reality, then the positive will never stick to the positive, ever. So what happens is that we've all done that, right? So we don't know when it's going to happen, and it happens exponentially too fast to predict when it's going to happen, too fast to stop it from happening. Okay? This is exactly what science is doing. This is so important, people. Oh. In this iterative cycle of samsara, we are doing the same fucking thing again. Okay? So there is something about the power of, so where you put your attention is what appears to be most real. So what's going to happen is when they try to reconcile the irreconcilable, because they're illusions and you can't get rid of illusions after they appear, you have to be prior to them. So they're going to build a freaking machine whether it's a quantum computer, like whether it's the physical realm, actually like the Large Hadron Collider, actually creating a physical black hole that creates a physical, I don't think it really matters because it's all metaphor. So whether it's a physical black hole that we create, smashing these particles together, testing the theory, testing string theory. See, quantum mechanics and gravity, they're irreconcilable. It's like the yin and the yang. It's the thought realm and the physical realm. They are two distinct entities, and they both arise separately from the absolute. They're mirror images of each other. That's why it looks like they're causal. So what's going to happen is that whether it's a quantum computer along with the metaverse and the extinction of the species, or a physical black hole, what's going to happen is that we're going to create a singularity, and this will create a new iteration of samsara. See, you can't find completion, you can't reunify illusions. You can just create more illusions. So that's what's going to happen. So instead of getting to the thought-free state and abiding as the absolute, science is just going to keep pushing forward, and it's literally going to create the new iteration of samsara, which is human consciousness entering the digital realm and accepting that as the new reality. So
part of what it means to be
we're in a time loop. We've done this over and over and over and over and over and over infinitely, right, Leo? And we're gonna do it a fucking again. So yeah, we just popped into this realm, right? Not knowing how it happened, how it happened. We don't know. And what I'm telling you is we're witnessing right now the construction of the next iteration. We're witnessing, it's happening right before our eyes. It's happening within our consciousness. We are constructing the next iteration of the illusory world. And it's a hybrid realm of the thought realm and the physical realm in the digital realm.
To be a truth seeker is that you're willing to actually invest energy, which is why what you're doing is so good, is because I can tell you're preparing for these interviews. You're researching, you're reading, you're studying videos, you're being open-minded. You're actually putting your own ass on the line. You're losing sleep over this. And that's exactly what it takes. You can't reach the truth. You can't reach God and love and all these things. You can't reach the ultimate toe by just sitting around and navel gazing and just kind of doing what's comfortable for you.
No, Leo, you can't get there with thought.
Because the truth may not be comfortable.
Oh, that's definitely true, man. If anything is true, that's true. Do you think? See, I don't know if I can.
Is the end of the world uncomfortable? Is realizing that everyone that you
to me, truth
love
is so
and care
not trivial.
for
Some people think of it
illusions?
as simply statements
There's no
that need to be
individuals.
accepted, written
It's not
propositions.
easy to accept.
But
Right.
the truth can be so harsh and so.
Oh, we got to talk about two levels of truth too. but make a note of that. But before we get there, let me finish my thoughts.
Man, we have so much to talk about.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
We haven't even touched on self-deception limitation. Okay,
We can talk for a week.
Yeah.
By the way, we can leave some of these for
Infinitely.
Sure. And people who are watching, if you would like to see a second part, please let us know.
And we have still hours to talk, so we can pace this out. Anyways, but actually, let's pause right here for a second because I want to restart my camera just so that we're safe with the file.
Good idea.
All right. Well, first of all, I can feel your authenticity, so I can trust your words to a certain degree. But also, just like, I mean, it's just obvious from your work, like with Chris Langan, you were asking very technical questions about this term and that fucking nerdy term that he used, and so just even the fact that you care, just even the questions you kind of ask already show the level of interest you have.
All right, let's get to
It's
this.
just obvious.
If you can remember where you were.
Yeah, so yeah, I remember exactly where we were. So we were talking about. Oh yeah, I remember. So the question was like, if you were infinitely selfless and powerful, what would you create? And you said, I don't really know. Like, why would I?
Exactly what your life is, that's what you've created. So here's the thing about this game, is that by design, it's impossible for even God to know what and when, what's going to happen and when it's going to happen. That's the whole point of it. You see?
Why would I be biased towards creating a tree or something else, right? That's what you said. And then I told you that here now we're going to answer the origin of all existence.
Yeah, right.
Why anything exists. Okay, so here's why. So look, if you're all powerful and you're all loving and you're completely selfless, you can create absolutely anything just by willing it into existence. What you would create, and you're completely unbiased, you're right about that. You're completely unbiased. What you would create is absolutely everything.
No. If you're completely unbiased, there's no creation. If there's no bias, there's no creation. This is what Leo doesn't understand, is that there is unmanifest absolute. So the bias, the bias of attention is what creates the illusion, this. So here's the other thing, is that in this realm, omnipotence comes with complete power. Absolute power requires no control. So you can have all of the power, but you have none of the control. Well, how does that work? In the observation. So things are spontaneous in that state, with that mechanism, if you will, the way of existing. So here's the thing, is that the thought process isn't in control of anything. It's just, it thinks that it's actually controlling things, but it's just describing things after the fact, even. So when I say all of the power but none of the control, is that there's no thought process that goes along with the manifestation of what's occurring. And somehow, if you transcend the thought process and you get to that deeper level of functioning, that everything unfolds perfectly as your deeper self wishes it to be, beyond thought though. So for my own life, it's unfolded in a way that's far more amazing and desirable than anything that I ever imagined or could have planned with my mind. Because of my practice of getting beyond thought and abiding in as thought-free awareness, this life, this dream has turned into an amazing manifestation. So you have all power but none of the control.
Every possible form, every possible being, every possible thing that could be imagined, you imagine.
But what happens if you don't
And
imagine things?
why do you do that? So that you can give others a sense of the beauty and love that you are. So the entire point of God's creation is to create finite forms of itself so that those forms can then reunite back with itself to realize what it is, which is infinite goodness. So it's an infinite sharing of goodness.
Why does it create all possibilities?
Look at what's really going on.
So here's radical for you. The creation of possibilities is samsara. This is the point of the game, is to escape the game. So manifestation, any type of creation, is losing the game. You're being duped. Do you understand what I'm saying? Is that spirituality is the only game in town. Everything is spiritual in nature. Every single moment of everything that you focus on is the game. Every single time you focus on something external, whether it's a thought or a sensation, that projects the illusion that this is real, and you're stuck in delusion in the labyrinth. So when you create, all you do is create more labyrinth. It's harsh. Yeah. That's why a handful of humans have actually won this game and escaped.
The genius of what's
And
going
that's
on.
why I have
God has
followers,
infinite goodness, but
3
because
maybe?
it is one, it has no one to share the infinite goodness with. Who would you share it with? There's nobody else but you. So what you do is you deceive yourself to create an other who you could give that gift to. The gift of yourself, of God. The highest gift in the universe is the realization that you are God. But you can't share that gift with anybody. I can't share that gift with you until you realize that you're me. The realization that you're me is the gift I'm trying to give you.
Why does God care about sharing? Because embedded in that is the valuing of sharing.
It's love. Right? Why do you give your wife a present on Christmas? You're
Rolling of
you are
eyes.
Literally you literally have chosen to share your life with your wife. Why?
It's illusion. There is no
You're asking
wife.
me a question about motivations. I don't know. I could just give you
Your
a
wife
superficial
does
answer.
not
Like,
exist
why think?
in
Not,
the way
it may not
that
be
you
why,
believe
but why
her
could
to.
we do it?
I'm not interested in those. The answer is love. It's very simple. The answer is love. All your motivations boil down to variations of degrees of love that are filtered through your mind.
Let me tell you what occurs to me. So one, we said God is not self-conscious because there is no self to God there's no self to God before God creates a multiplicity.
God is self.
God is
is
self.
infinite self.
Yeah,
God
absolutely.
is all possible selves.
Just not an individual self.
So isness is prior to self-reflection in this case. So God can self-reflect, of course. God is not, but self-reflection is already a dualistic dynamic, you see, because there has to be a self and then a reflection that you're reflecting off of. So God is prior to that. God is just self, infinite self, and then it can also reflect in infinite ways.
Is it okay if I tell you just rapid fire some thoughts that occur to me? Yeah. Okay,
Sure.
so at first it's like God is selfless because God doesn't have a conception of self. Okay, so then God creates infinite types of selves. But then, and in order to share. But then I'm curious, number one, why is it in order?
He's struggling for purpose. What is the end result of all of this? Just more infinity? Just more experience? More emptiness? More unsubstantial experiences? It's samsara, my friend.
To share. Like, okay, well, God is made of love. Okay, but God is not aware of God. So God is not aware of sharing being a preeminent factor of himself or itself.
Love is such a metaphysically profound notion that it's prior to. I'm a little bit anthropomorphizing God here, so we have to be a little bit careful. So the notion of like God sharing, it makes sense from a human perspective. From a more like, if you want to be really strict about it, strictly speaking, love just is an endless flowering of creativity. So literally what God is creativity. It endlessly creates, because that's what love is. You see, there's such a profound unity between goodness, love, omnipotence, intelligence, consciousness, oneness, and creativity that literally, and love is that what it means to be infinite love is to just spontaneously create everything that could possibly exist. That's what love is. It's not just something love does, it's what love is. You can't be love unless you're everything. Love is everything.
Two thoughts that occur to me right now. I've always found, probably you the same as
Too abstract.
When you would consider yourself to be someone who was planning to be a scientist. I've always found the multiverse idea and the the universe that, I forget the type of, I'm forgetting the name of it, but there's why are the physical laws the way that they are? Because they're fine-tuned, because there are multiple universes, and I forget what.
So the incredibly fine-tunedness of this realm fits perfectly with the analogy that I gave earlier of the camera that's focused on its own, focusing on the screen.
Anthropic, is that the anthropic principle or something?
I've always found those to be lacking, because they're non-explanations. You're asking, well, why is it so and so? The answer is because it's everything at the same time. Okay, sure. I don't know how to work with that. I don't know how to use that.
That's exactly right. Like,
well,
yes, we can't. It's just too abstract. But there's nothing to hold on to with Leo's teachings. It's just too abstract, my friend. I'm sorry. I believe I side with Curt. Is that there's a lot of great ideas, but there's nothing to work with.
Okay, so that's one thought. One thought. Like, it seems to me to be the easy way out, even if it's true. It could be. Absolutely. Like, everything you say could be 100% correct. But I find it to be somewhat of an easy way out. And then number two, it's interesting that creation is so tied to love. So love to me is about unifying. But creation to me seems to me to be about distinction. If anything, destruction would be closer to unifying. Because as you destroy, you reduce down to zero, which is the same.
Yes!
As you create,
Yes!
proliferate.
Yes. It's the
Good.
transcendence.
Okay. So now notice
creation.
the following. What is creation and destruction? Duality. In fact, this is a classic duality of the yin and the yang. Right? So God has both aspects. What you should notice is that you can't create without destroying. Because, like,
So
let's say you have...
here's the thing, is that creation is not the highest level. Observation is the highest level, right? So if we take the Christian creation myth as a metaphor, a very accurate, valid metaphor. The first 6 days was all the creative process, right? God was doing all this creative stuff. But on the seventh day, he rested. It rested, my bad. So what is this resting period? What is this final era of the state of resting? Well, it's the observer, right? It's so here's something that not a lot of people talk about, but it seems pretty obvious to me, is when you take the metaphor, the creation myth metaphor, and the science metaphor of how all this came to be, well, they're freaking identical. So first of all, right, God said, let there be light, and there was light. So photons, right? The light is one of the first things that manifested after the Big Bang. So then the people way back when that was all written, I'm sure they used the earth as the foundation, right? So they skipped right from light into the functioning of the earth, and then it's exactly parallel. So the oceans separated, so there was the oceans, and then it separated into land, and then there were fish, and then there were birds, and then there were mammals, and then there were people. Sound familiar? So what's the seventh day? So science agrees with the Bible up until humans, right? Humans are the last evolutionary step on this creation, in this creation myth. And then they chill with God, right? In the garden, right? So so what's the next step for science, right? What's the next step? Well, it's quantum physics and the role of the observer. So the next step of science, which shows the importance of the observer, well, that is right in lockstep with pure observation. See? So the highest level is pure observation, which is the end of creation.
You have one sheet of paper on which to draw. You're going to draw some painting. Like, let's say you have an Etch-a-Sketch. You draw on the Etch-a-Sketch, and then you got your sand painting, but now you want to paint something else. Well, you got to shake the Etch-a-Sketch, destroy all this stuff, and then you can paint some more. So the two are intimately tied. I mean, it's a circle of life, if you want to think about it that way. Like, you can't have... It's sort of like you're saying, well, Leo, isn't life good but death bad? This is a very naive way of thinking about it, because if you go and actually look at how ecosystems work in nature, you realize quickly that the only reason you can have life is because of death. It's because the gazelle died.
That's another one of these triune systems. So the opposite, there is no opposite to life. There is only life. There is no such thing as non-existence. There's only life. And the two extremes of life are birth and death. So death is not the opposite of life. Birth is the opposite of death. And they both are illusions that arise from the absolute, which is life.
That there can be baby lions, and because of the baby lions, some of them die, and then because of that there can be worms, and because of worms there can be grass, and because of grass there can be gazelles, and because of gazelles there can be more baby lions, and so it goes around in a circle forever. So it's both.
I see it as being, I also
Creation
agree
and
that's a
destruction.
naive point of view to think of death as evil and then birth as necessarily good. But I also don't see it as, I see it as like in our
But that's
world,
our,
everything,
see again,
virtually
that's our
everything.
bias.
In fact,
Our bias is towards everything of that triune system. Our bias is towards the positive, the life, the physical, but that's changing now. Our attention is moving away from the physical. But that is the bias, right? Even the word negative is itself a negative connotation. Like the word negative is directly connected to something we don't want. We don't want death. We only want birth. But we can't have anything other than life. See, this is where this idea of non-existence is just, and I really think that's what fear is fundamentally, is a complete rejection of the notion of a non-existence. That's the, like we want to puke because it's so wrong, this notion of non-existence. And the fear of that is our reaction to it. It's so wrong that it's so fundamentally wrong.
think of a counterexample. Everything that we think of good is predicated on something that we would think of as evil. Let's say you think in those domains already good and evil, in the sense that, well, what do you think of as good? You think that, to give an example of buying a gift for your wife, well, how was that gift made? Right? It probably was predicated on some suffering of some children in some faraway land, and even if it wasn't there, well,
Turtles all the
produced
way.
some emissions that weren't good for so-and-so creatures, and in some sense that's evil. In some sense, it's like every single act, me talking is destroying some cellular.
And this is another indication that the thought process is only there to generate more thought. Do you see how this always generates into infinity? Every time a conclusion is attempted to be reached through the thought process, no conclusion is ever reached via the thought process. It goes for infinity either in a reductionary way or expansionary way. Expansionary, that's not a word. So it's the transcendence of. It's the only way it stops is if you transcend it, by pulling your attention away.
Cellular creatures.
Exactly. Of course, just for you to be alive, you have to be like killing viruses and bacteria in your
So
body
you
every
have
day.
to privilege yours, whatever your quote-unquote means,
Right.
over theirs. Okay, I understand that. Though I don't see it as a metaphysical necessity.
Birth and
in the
death
same way
within
that you
life.
do. And the reason is, like, let's imagine, I keep going back to math, but let's imagine the natural numbers before they become the natural numbers. So you start with the empty set and you call that 0. And then you apply a successor function, you get 1. You don't destroy 0. And then you apply a successor function, you get 2. While retaining
That's the
0, 1,
evolutionary
and 2,
process.
you apply a successor function, you get 0, 1, 2, 3. So, and that's, I would consider to be an act of creation. But I don't see
The number system is a model of the evolution of consciousness. It has nothing to do with counting. It has nothing to do with quantity. Again, this is our misinterpretation of the message that's presented as the number system. We've misinterpreted it, and that's why it takes 360 pages to prove that 1 + 1 = 2. It's a convincing. It's a brainwashing. It is. If you develop into that kind of complexity, it's obviously fucking wrong. Oh no, but we're just going to keep going and going and going. It's like a cult leader just cramming the same nonsense over and over and over and over and over, and they're so deep into it that they don't realize that they're getting hypnotized. It's just a convincing. So Occam's razor would cut that 360 pages down to one sentence. 1 + 1 = 2, because every single one of us believes it to be. There's no fundamental connection between the number system and physical reality. The number system is the foundation of all mathematics, right? And at what point does mathematics become completely abstract? Pretty freaking early on, isn't it? What I'm saying is that it's all abstract. None of it applies to the physical world at all. And this is why it sounds like it's nonsense, because it seems so obvious that there's a causal relationship, that the physical world runs on some sort of mathematical formula. But it's all metaphor. And it's, again, they are mirrors of each other. They mirror each other. They are not causally related.
See an act of destruction in that creation right there.
Yeah, so there's some profound things that could be said about that. First of all of the creation that we know as humans is all finite creation. So you're really just talking about finitude. The fact that everything you create is going to be finite. It's not going to be infinite. And that's right, every finite thing has limits. That's what it means to be finite, is to have a limit. And the only unlimited thing is completely indistinct. So every distinction that you imagine is going to be finite. For example, in your mind, if you're imagining an elephant, there's an elephant. Now, for you to imagine a giraffe, you have to let go of the element to imagine a giraffe. And so, literally, for your thoughts to work, you have to destroy and let go of all thoughts. And so it is with all form. Every finite thing interferes with the existence. So, for example, here's the profound way to think about it. Let's say you have a coffee table. For that coffee table to be a coffee table, it has to not be
I get it. Yeah.
dining table, not be a chair, not be a chicken, not be your wife, not be whatever. It has to be that. And by being finite, it excludes all other possibilities. That's literally what a chair or a coffee table is.
Kind of like the collapse of the wave function, isn't it? Again, it's all metaphor, right? So if you look around that same room and don't say table, coffee table, chair, none of those thoughts arrive in your consciousness, where is the separation? Where are the separately existing objects? Where is the United States? Is there a line on the ground between Canada and the United States? It's all in your head. The whole, all of the physical realm, all of the mental realm, is superimposed over top of the physical realm. They don't mix. They're not related.
Illusion of every possibility other than itself, as it is in its finite form.
Did you happen to watch the interview that I had with this guy named Anthony Metivier? So he's a memory champion. He's a memory champion who says that memory is intimately tied with consciousness. And to me, I don't. Okay, well, to me,
of course,
at least previous to about a few seconds ago, I thought that the memory is almost irrelevant to consciousness. But then what you said to me right now, it reminds me of working memory. Because let's imagine that the average person has a working memory of 7 entities. So for you to imagine something new, you have to replace one of those 7 with something else. You don't have infinite working memory, in other words.
But even if you did, it's still a problem. Do you see? Imagine you have infinite memory, right? You have infinite memory. Even if you let's say every memory is just like a slot. You have like a little box you can put an item in. Even if you put one item into that box, that space has been filled by that item and not by some other item. That's a finite thing. You've actually created a limit when you did that. Because, like, let's say you could have put a frog in your memory, or a giraffe, or an elephant, but you only put one, not all of them. Otherwise, you'd have a superposition. You see, like if you're talking about like a quantum memory, imagine a memory slot where you can stick multiple items into the same memory slot over top of themselves, and then you get a superposition. And if you put every possible item into that memory slot, you would literally get infinity or nothingness in that memory slot, because it would all superimpose into nothing.
Yeah.
Understand
It's
this?
extremely interesting. You know, okay, keep going.
So look, think about it like this. So imagine, let's take the domain of all animals, all possible animals that could exist, ever. So let's take a giraffe, a frog, an elephant, and so forth.
I tire. I really do. You just these discussions themselves are an expression of going on for infinity. So I'm just going to lay it down like I pretty much already have. The conversation could go on forever, and I think they have a second one that goes on for 7 hours. So what's the conclusion? I'm going to tell you what the freaking conclusion is. Well, I already have. So I'm developing into redundancy. But it's the same thing. I'm going to say the same thing. He's right. This is a simulation or a dream. It's a divine game. And the goal, the purpose of the game, is to escape the game. And escaping the game means that it's the end of creation, because it's all illusory and unsubstantial. And I'll show you again the state of complete self-fulfillment. You see, it's absolute happiness. Absolute in that it is not relative to any circumstance, any condition, any experience. So your very beingness is happiness. You are happiness. And that's the answer. Take it or leave it, but that's the way it is. And if you want to follow the path of truth, you must transcend thought. And that path will take you to reality. And then you'll just be happy. Simple pimple.